So here we are in Microsoft Flight Simulator again to look at another new add-on aeroplane for the simulator that was released today. And that's the thing that you can see in front of you, which is the Caproni Vizzola C22 Ventura, which is a rather unusual looking plane, and it all will become clear as to why it's an unusual looking plane as we progress through this review. But first, a little bit about the add-on. I will put a link in the description below of where you can get this thing. It's available from Sim Market, and it's very cheap too, being only €10. So, you know, they're pretty much giving this thing away when you consider how good it is. Now, it's from developer Noriega Designs, who you may or may not have heard of. This isn't the first aeroplane that they've made for a simulator, but it is the first aeroplane that they've made for Microsoft Flight Simulator. This same aircraft, they made a version of it for Microsoft FSX and Lockheed Martin's P3D. So, you know, if you use those sims, this is pretty much the same as the one in that functionality wise. So that's the developer. As I say, there'll be a link in the description. So as we can see, it is a diminutive little twin jet aeroplane with a military paint scheme, and you know there's a reason for that. So as I say, the add-on itself is €10, and for that you get this plane, the C22 Ventura. You get quite a few paint jobs for the thing, mostly civilian paint jobs plus this military paint scheme. I'll explain why it has a military paint scheme in a moment or two. But what you also get is you get two manuals with the thing, two PDF manuals. Now that's not unusual to get two PDF manuals with an add-on aeroplane. However, it is slightly unusual in this instance because one of them is 18 pages, which is a quick start guide that has screenshots of the cockpit and the controls and what have you, and they're all labeled up, and it explains all that and tells you how to get going with the thing and what have you. And that's 18 pages, so it's very, very quick read, although the thing is actually fairly intuitive in terms of controls. It's not vastly complicated. The other manual is 77 pages long, and it is a replica of the manual for the real thing. So you get a pretty good set of manuals with this. So if you want to sort of like you read the entire manual for the real thing, you can, because you get it with it. And another interesting thing about this is that Mario Noriega Designs, when they were building this thing, they had help from the designer of the real aeroplane. He sent them all the diagrams for the thing and helped them out with it on the systems and what have you. So this functionally is very much like the real thing, flies like the real thing. It's right on the numbers and all this kind of stuff. So it's very, very cool. So you get this cool jet, a load of different paint jobs for it, all of which are very, very nice. Two great manuals, and as I say, only €10. What's not to like? So a little bit about the real plane. As you can see, this is a very, very nice model, both inside and out, and it looks very much like the real thing if you've ever seen one of these for real. It's got a very clean look to it because of the origins of the real aeroplane, which is born out of a glider. So if the manufacturer of the real aeroplane, Caproni, this was the last aircraft that Caproni actually built. Now, I'm sure you've heard of Caproni. They were around from the very early days of aviation. They made bombers in the First World War for the Italians, and in the 30s they made lots of seaplanes and racing planes and stuff like that. In the Second World War they made bombers and fighters and seaplanes for the Italian Air Force and what have you. And after the Second World War, they made some trainer aircraft and stuff like that, and a lot of gliders. And that was a big thing for Caproni in the 70s and 80s. They made gliders. One of which was if you're a glider pilot like me, you'll know this, is the A21 Glider, which is a little bit unusual in comparison to sort of most gliders that, you know, had a very, very big wingspan, but it's got a weird wing profile that's sort of wide and then goes thin at the wingtips. But it also had side-by-side seating, which is not unique for a glider, but most gliders tend to have a tandem cockpit, because that gives it a small frontal area. But the A21 Glider has side-by-side seating, and it was pretty successful. The A21 was, I think it was marketed in the US by Avia, so there were a lot of them about, and it got a lot of world records and stuff like that. I think some of those still stand, actually. But Caproni had a bit of a mad minute in the late 70s, and what they decided to do with the A21 glider was do a jet-powered version of it. Now, gliders with sort of self-launching engines are not that unusual, but they're usually a little flip-up electric motor with a propeller on it. But they decided to make one with a jet engine, which is the A21 SJ, which is a completely mad thing. It just looks like a normal glider, but it's got a little jet engine inside. I don't think it's a particularly powerful one, but it's good enough to get that thing up to about 33,000 feet, which is amazing. But what that did was that gave them the idea to create a more sophisticated jet aeroplane, and that's what they did. They created this, which is the C22 Ventura, and they had a bit of an idea in mind when they created this. They wanted it to be a very light sport jet, but they also wanted it to be a relatively inexpensive training aircraft. But what they also wanted to do was they also wanted to create a military version of it, which would have hard points on the wings and would be able to be used a bit like the Cessna Bird Dog and things like that, as like a spotting forward air control plane and what have you, and for reconnaissance and stuff like that. And so they did actually create the this aeroplane that we see in front of you, which is the C22 Ventura, and they did a C22J, which was a similar sort of thing, but more geared towards being a trainer. And then they proposed the C22R, which was going to be the military version, and lots of air forces did look at it and consider it and what have you, but it never really got off the ground. That was in the sort of early 80s and what have you. However, more recently, I think in about 2016 or something like that, the Italian Air Force were looking at this thing again and considering doing an updated version of it as a military aircraft. So you might see this thing tip up eventually. Now, the difference between the sort of A21 glider and the A21 SJ, which was one with the jet engine, was that they had kind of like a conventional glider shape to them, but they were a little bit unusual in that part of them was sort of glass fiber and part of them was glass fiber paneling over an alloy frame and stuff like that. But this thing, the C22, is all metal construction, so it's a little bit tougher and more streamlined because obviously they were gearing it towards being a military aeroplane. And that's why this thing has this military paint job on it, because it's probably the paint scheme that the C22R, had it gone into production, would have had, although it would have had some pylons under the wings so it could launch sort of smoke marker rockets and stuff like that, and maybe carried machine guns, because this thing, the real thing, the C22, can lift about 450 pounds of cargo and what have you. So it's got a little bit of lifting capability for being such a small thing. Now, so let's have a look at the inside, because you can see that it's a very, very nice model on the outside, but on the inside the nice stuff continues. So here's the inside of the thing. Now, what we've got an opening canopy, and you can hear that the sounds are good because we can hear the gas strut extending on the canopy there, like that. And most of this stuff is as far as I'm aware, recorded off the real aircraft, including the jet engine noises and stuff like that. So that's good. We've got a whiskey compass up top. Pretty much everything on this panel works, and most things there work as well. It's only when we get back here and we look at the side panels that things don't work. So there's a circuit breaker panel there that's not really doing very much, and there are some circuit breakers there that don't do very much either, and there is a lock switch there and a seat adjusting switch there that don't do much. But once we move forward at that point, pretty much everything works. So this panel here is an emergency, I think it's a gas blow down for the landing gear, and that actually functions. And then what we've got is we've got this thing for hot air and cabin heat and what have you. So because Microsoft Flight Simulator models icing on the windscreens and stuff like that, that's kind of useful. And we've got this thing here for windscreen defrost as well, because this thing has a service ceiling of 25,000 feet. So it's possible that you might get icing on the thing. This is the speed brakes. Speed brakes on Caproni gliders are kind of unusual and not exactly, if not exactly unique, then pretty close to being unique. I will deploy that, and you'll see when we go on the exterior view what I mean by that. In that, what happens with the flaps is they pivot and function as air brakes, and that's what's happening now. You can see there, obviously, you can operate them off keyboard shortcuts, but you can obviously deploy flaps as well if you want to. So it's interesting that the speed brakes function like that. Not unique, but pretty unusual. We've got twin throttles because it's got 2 jet engines. We've got emergency throttles there. We've got a bunch of stuff for starting the engines. You can start the engines with Control plus E, but if you want to start things realistically, you can. So what have we got down here? Well, we've got the flap lever. Hang on. There we go, lost my mouse pointer for a second. So we've got increase the instrument lighting, and we've got deploy the flaps and retract the flaps and what have you. We've got landing gear position indicator, not lit up at the minute because we haven't got the thing powered up. And then we've got our landing lever there, and you can see that we can set that to off if we want to. So let's get this thing powered up. Yeah. So we've got a battery switch there, so we'll switch the battery on and what have you, and we'll see that some things start lighting up, and we can hear a bit of sound from there. And then what we can do is switch the generators on like that. So we've got switch the left-hand generator on like that. And then what we've got is we've got these things. So I've got a guarded switch there for the fuel cutoff switch there, so we can get those things on, and then we can open the fuel shut-off valves, and they light up there. And then what we've got is we've got the booster pump, and we can put that on like that. And then what we've got is we've got this thing where we can dry motor the engines if we want to. If you're familiar with jet engines, you might want to do that, you know, to sort of like test them or what have you. And then what we've got here is we've got engine test modes there. So let's go and crank this thing up. Yeah, so start the left-hand engine and start the right-hand engine, and we'll go on the external view, and we can hear that thing starting up. Now the real engines on this thing are TRS engines. Each one is 220 pounds of thrust, which doesn't sound like a lot, 220 pounds of thrust. If you know anything about jet engines on fighters and jet airplane airliners and stuff like that are usually things like 22,000 pounds of thrust and stuff like that. So 220 pounds of thrust does not sound a lot. However, just bear this in mind. I'm going to go back in the cockpit. Just bear this in mind, yeah. The C22 Ventura, this thing weighs 1,590 pounds, yeah, and it has two 220 pound thrust engines, jet engines. Now, to put that in context, a Cessna 172 weighs 100 pounds more than this aeroplane, and only typically has a sort of 160 horsepower engine. This thing weighs 100 pounds less than a Cessna 172, carries 2 less people, and has two jet engines on it. So this thing can really shift. Now, we don't need the booster pumps on because the engines are now self-sustaining, and you can see got a nice smoke effect coming out of them. So let's have a look at the panel and what we get. Fairly basic panel, but good enough for what you want. So we'll get the pitot heat on there. We've got a parking brake there that we can use if we want. We can test the warning lights if we want. We've got a fairly standard panel there, you know, airspeed indicator and altimeter and heading indicators and all this kind of stuff. And you'll notice that the artificial horizon is toppled at the moment because we haven't got that turned on. So obviously what we might want to do is turn these things on. So we've got lights for the thing there, like that. And there's turning on the turning bank indicator, and then it's turning on the artificial horizon. We've got Collins avionics up here, including ADF and what have you, so we can turn these things on. Notice it does have a working transponder, so you know if you want to go on VATSIM with this, and it also has ADF if you want to do that sort of traditional navigation stuff. Over on this side, we've got equipment for DME there, and we've got an altitude alerter there, because you probably don't want to go past 25,000 feet with this. OBS gauge there, strip gauges here for exhaust gas temperature and fuel pressure and things like that. And then we can increase the lighting on this thing, and we can tweak stuff. Working chronometer with a switch to start it there, alternate static air and what have you. And that is about the size of the thing. Now, since we've got all these lights on, let's have a look at what this thing looks like at night. So what I will do is I'll get that thing up, and we'll darken things down a bit, and you'll see that what we've got is we've got a kind of nice cockpit here that obviously what we can do is we can start increasing the lighting and stuff like that. And then when we go on the exterior view, nice nav lights on the thing, good and bright and what have you. So good night lighting if you want to fly this thing. But you know, for the purposes of this review, what we'll do is we'll look at it in the daylight. So back in the cockpit, what I will do is I will swing the view over to here, so we're sort of centralized on that, and then let's taxi this thing out. So pretty basic avionics, but the manuals go into great detail about that sort of thing, because you've got the manual for the real aeroplane. So we're going to release the parking brake, and we'll take this out for a bit of a taxi and wait while you see how this thing flies. More about its performance when we're taking off. So I can release the parking brake, could use the keyboard shortcut for that if I wanted to. And we got a little bit of power on the engines. And away we go. Get out of the way, mister. So here we are. Now this thing, when you're in the cockpit view, in common with gliders and things that are derived from gliders as this is, it feels really, really fast because you are quite low down to the ground. You know, if you're familiar with driving sports cars and stuff like that, you'll know that feeling, because your arse is inches off the ground. It feels really, really fast, which is why glider takeoffs are always really, really good fun in real life. So anyway, here we are out to the runway, and obviously what I can do is I can deploy some flaps if I like. So you can see that what we've got there is full span flaps. So we'll just have a little couple of stages of flaps for this takeoff. The manual for this thing, you hear that? I'll just bring it to a halt. Electric trim. The manual recommends you trim things up a bit on this, so I've just given it a bit of nose up trim. This thing stalls at about 65 knots, so that's quite a slow stall speed for a jet. Let's get the thing in the air. Now, of course, being a jet and a twin jet, you see that plane landing on 23 left? So I've not cheated on the sim here. I have got AI planes running. So we get the gear up. And we'll get the flaps up. And away we go. Need to give it a bit more nose up trim, because I want the thing to fly hands off. So, the real thing. The good news doesn't end there. I've heard a lot of good news about this thing. The real thing is fully aerobatic, like most gliders are. It's stressed for plus 6G and minus 3G, so you can throw this thing about if you want. Service ceiling 25,000 feet. It will climb at 1,800 feet a minute. As I say, it stalls at 65 knots. It will cruise at 175 knots, and on full throttle, if you want to leather it about in this thing, it'll do about 260 knots, and it has a range of about 460 miles. And as I say, you can lift about 450 pounds with the thing. So despite its fairly diminutive size, you can use it to haul stuff about if you use on air or air haul and stuff like that. And as I say, aerobatic. Now, it's not an F-16, so if you want to do stuff like that, you're probably going to have to get at least a little bit of speed on. But as you can see, you don't have to worry about chucking this thing around. Now, of course, the other fun thing that you can do with stuff like this is this. So if you want something that's pretty easy to fly, and you can use VFR, that was warning me that I was getting a little bit fast there. But yeah, when you get speed on, it's got a good rate of roll. And of course, when you look out the side windows, you've got those tip tanks on there, so it feels like you're in a jet fighter. But it feels like you're in a jet fighter, but you can land at 65 knots, so you could operate this from small airfields. You could probably get it down on grass, in fact. I don't know whether you'd particularly want to because of the possibility of FOD going into your jet engines, but you know, I dare say you could. Now, of course, if we want to slow this thing down, we've got those spoilers, which you can see really kill the speed very, very quickly indeed, and would allow you to make pretty steep approaches into things, which is something that you do with gliders quite a lot. You can see there, you can have the nose down, and it's holding at 126 knots without the gear. And the engines spool up pretty quickly. And you can see how that accelerates. I'm already doing 180, 190, approaching 200, 210, 220, 230. So this thing can get about. Pretty cool. And you will know that I'm over the Payware Macasims Manchester Airport, Echo Golf Charlie Charlie, which is the place that I work in real life. And you also saw that there were planes taking off, so I've not cheated and turned off the AI planes, and you can see that I've got the graphics on fairly full throttle by the terrain, and I've also got photogrammetry on, so it's streaming the real world terrain, and this thing is cheerfully maintaining around about 30 FPS because I've got it locked to 30 FPS. If you look up at the top left, 28.9 as the airport comes into view, 29, and that's on my not particularly well endowed computer. This is a Kaby Lake i5 Intel processor, so quite an old processor, and it's ATI Radeon RX 480 GPU, so that's 8 gigabytes of DDR5, but it's quite an old graphics card, so not an expensive one. There's 44 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM on the computer, and the motherboard is an Asus Z270p. So this is by no means a flying machine of a computer, but this thing is running sweet as a nut, really. There we go, look at that, 250 knots. Pretty cool. Yeah, going past 250 knots, that'd be the point where ATC would be shouting at me. So well, let's bring this thing in for a landing. So we want to slow this thing down. So let's get them brakes out again. And there we go. And I spilled more than 100 knots there really, really quickly. We got them in. And then we'll get the flaps down. And we'll get the gear down. And we'll head back to the airport. You can see how fast this thing is by how far away from the airport I actually ended up. So yeah, this is absolutely great fun, and you can tell from the way it's moving around that this thing wants to do aerobatics. I'm just changing the trim of this a little bit to get the nose down. And keep in mind that it doesn't matter if you're a little bit high and fast on approach, because this thing's got those speed brakes. So if you think you're coming in a bit hot, get those brakes out and kill that speed, like you tend to do in gliders, which would not be out of keeping with the origins of this thing. So you can see we're coming to 97 knots and what have you. Probably get the brakes in a little bit and then get a little bit of speed on just to sort of carry us over Shadow Moss Road and all that lot. So we're definitely going to make the runway. And then if you wanted to, you could do what you do in a glider, which is sort of play kind of trombone on the spoilers a little bit to bring yourself down for a landing. And there we go. Come on the deck. I'll dump the spoilers as well. There we are, and obviously because of its glider origins, you could probably cheerfully bounce this thing over the grass if you wanted to. You know, I'm not sure the tower at my works would be very happy if you did that. But of course, that's the pleasure of flight sim. And we probably should get the speed brakes in and the flaps up. Although I did see a Lufthansa CRJ at work today, taxiing in with still with its full flaps down, which is you know, not something I tend to do myself. You know, kicking up FOD into the flap mechanisms and stuff like that. But you know, unless they had an issue with actually retracting the flaps. But yeah, that was merrily taxiing past 27 on the way to the remote stands with the full flaps still down today. And we'll get this thing around here. I'm not going to worry too much about following the taxiways. I have to do all that all day at work. So it's nice to be able to ignore that. Let's be cheeky and go underneath this A320 and come on to this stand here, stand 4, which is literally outside where I work. Because where I work, when I'm not out on the ramp, is that building you can see in front of you there. Anyway, let's shut this thing down. So you can see all the temperatures are dropping on the gauges and all that kind of stuff. And obviously we can open the canopy. And there you go. That is the Mario Noriega Designs Caproni Vizzola C22 Ventura. Link in the description of where you can get this thing. Go on, you know you want it. It's not very often that I say that something is probably a must-have, but in this instance, I would say yes. Go and get this thing because it's amazing fun. Great fun to blast about at low altitude. It's aerobatic. You can do all kinds of stuff on it. It's got quite a good spin if you overcook things and what have you. And as you've seen, just a really, really good laugh. And for €10, they're practically giving this thing away. It's really great. You get loads of paint schemes with it, and the manual. The price is practically worth it for the manual, to be honest. Manuals, I should say. So there you go. That's it for this one from Shock's Hanger Quick Shots. Take care, everyone. I've got another review coming up, which I'm not doing tomorrow because I'm training at work tomorrow. But I'm off after that, so I'm going to do my other one. So if you like things coming thick and fast on my channel, there will be another review being uploaded in the next day or so. And if you like the stuff that I do, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps me out and it encourages me to make more stuff. But in the meantime, take care, everyone. And if you do get this thing, have fun with it, which I'm sure you will. Anyway, that's it for now. Bye.